A big cool down is coming for most of the week ahead. You typically don't really actually see this too often in the month of July, and it's really all complements of northwest flow, a kind of rare setup. Typically, you would actually see this type of setup in June, but definitely not for late July. You get a ridge of high pressure just pretty much locked and loaded over a good part of the desert southwest and much of the west and Pacific Northwest, while we've got northwest flow aloft, and that's a much cooler flow for the central and eastern two-thirds of the U.S. And then it's also tapping into an abundance amount of moisture down there into the Gulf of Mexico. And with a stalled frontal boundary, it'll cause more of an overrunning type setup, and you get these kind of tropical type downpours into the heat of the afternoon. And some of these rainfall rates could approach over 2 inches per hour at times. You can actually see it better what we're talking about here on the 500 millibars, with that ridge just pretty much dominating a good part of the desert southwest. Much of the west coast has been picking up plenty of warm, if not hot conditions, even record-breaking temperatures for a lot of those areas. Even Idaho, I saw the other day, Boise cranked out 108 degrees. That's some serious heat. And those triple digits actually reach all the way well into Montana. But it's a completely different perspective with much cooler air, and very unusual, especially as now we're in the hottest part of July. Pretty rare to see some 10 to 15 degree below average temperature anomalies for a widespread area, not just for a day or two, but actually for the entire week. Kind of unheard of for the month of July. It's not like it hasn't happened before, but it's actually been a while since something like this has actually happened. And it's happening at the same time where we've got some higher dew points. So it does come with an increased humidity and increased rainfall, especially for those areas where you actually see the dew points in the 70s. That's where they have a little bit more abundance amount of moisture, some of those 2-inch per hour rainfall rates, and the overrunning type setups going to cause heavy rain events from essentially central and south and southeast Texas all the way for the deep south, much of the southeast, and really extending into the Carolinas, and much of the northeast as well will be picking up on some of the heavier rain showers. And look at those temperatures. Definitely take a picture, because it's not going to last that much long. I mean, we have all week long, but next week there are subtle signs that things change in a big way. But for now, we're definitely going to enjoy the cooler anomalies if you especially live into the central and eastern two-thirds of the U.S. with that 5, 10, and at sometimes 15 degrees below average. It's not going to feel anything like July in any stretch of the imagination. And you can see where the stalled frontal boundary is, and it's right along that stalled frontal boundary, especially if you live on the southern side of that stalled frontal boundary. That's where you've got some of those higher dew point content, a little bit more moisture in the atmosphere, and that's where it's going to ring out some heavier rains. And it's doing that actually right now, and you get some sporadic heavier rains. It's not all the time. It's kind of scattered. It'll rain, downpour like 20 minutes or so, then it'll stop and it'll pick back up again. So, and at sometimes you can get some of these thunderstorms to stall out, and that's when you could have some isolated flood advisories in place. We've seen that several times, even this morning, draped across this little cool front. But away from that cool front, it's nothing but the high pressure. And under that high pressure, you've got a lot of sinking air, and sinking air is a dry air, and it's a warm air, and that's where the heat levels crank up in a big way. But yes, again, further south, that's where the abundance amount of moisture is. That's where you get some of those 2-inch per hour rainfall rates for a good part of the deep south and much of the southeast. And that's where most of the heavier rains will be for likely for much of the work week. And good thing is it doesn't actually come with really any severe weather. This is actually kind of a rarity as in itself, considering how busy we have been over the last couple of months on the severe weather front. Things are starting to wind down in a big way. And actually tomorrow, you don't even actually have it at a marginal risk in place. So that's actually kind of a rarity in itself. It's been a while since we've seen a day like that, and that's coming in for tomorrow. But if if you break it down over the next 48 hours, really along that stalled frontal boundary, we do have some monsoonal flow. So it does bring some beneficial rains for those areas into the desert Southwest, places like in Nevada, areas into Arizona, into New Mexico. And then we also have a little bit of a low pressure center with the kind of a trough diving down into Minnesota, as well as into Wisconsin, getting into Michigan. You're going to have some sporadic isolated showers and thunderstorms. But yes, likely those areas further south, and especially those areas where you see that deep red, that's some higher water vapor content and some higher rain amounts. Some can't roll out some 2 to maybe even 4 inches of rain over the next 48 hours, really right along where that stalled frontal boundary will be. So at times you can get some isolated flash flooding, but again, we're not really concerned about severe weather with this nature, just kind of more or less tropical type downpours, which have high water content values, and they tend to rain pretty extreme levels for a short time span, and then kind of stop and then maybe kind of pick back up again. But going into going into the day on Tuesday, you can see the rarity of this setup with such an extended wide area of those below average temperatures. We're talking widespread 80s, widespread 70s. I mean, it's hard pressed to see even a 90-degree temperature for a high for a good part of the central and eastern 2/3. The only warmer and if not hotter air is under that ridge of high pressure, and you're cranking into the triple digits almost into Canada here and back into Montana, good part of Idaho, and of course the desert Southwest. So unfortunately, you won't be getting a break from the heat. You're still going to be elevated really all week long. It's mainly those areas across the central and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. and you can really see it better on Wednesday. And this is something that just doesn't happen very often in July. There's the heat ridge really building. I mean, some of these areas have picked up record-breaking temperatures. I know Vegas, I know Phoenix, and yes, even those areas into California. Again, if you live kind of like on the coast, you really hadn't been feeling this heat. But going inland, you definitely feel it in a big way. And that heat just expands and dominates and actually lifts even further north, well up into Canada, heading into Wednesday. And that troughing inversion and the northwest flow gets even more pronounced with the jet stream dipping all the way down into Mexico, folks. That is a rare sight to see for late July standards. And of course, that brings the cooler anomalies all the way down to the Gulf Coast states. So even if you live along the coast, you're going to be feeling it in a big way with those just cooler, rainier, cloudier type setups into the heat of the afternoon. And it really doesn't change on Wednesday with that jet stream dipping all the way down. Again, you're going to have that kind of overrunning setup even for those areas further south. So areas that have been kind of drier on the dry side for the last couple of months for like Austin and San Antonio. Unfortunately, Houston's been really wet. Unfortunately, you're going to get a lot more rain coming up for this time frame coming up on Wednesday and especially into Thursday with those heavier type rain bands moving in with that stalled frontal boundary draped across that region. So yes, those areas across the southeast and a good part of the mid-Atlantic states and especially along the eastern coast regions heading all the way into Maine, you're going to be seeing the benefits of these cooler anomalies, if not almost heavier rains moving back in. And there you see it by, heading into Wednesday, we do have that upgraded slight risk for heavier rains that'll extend much of central Texas, South Texas, Southeast Texas, but especially those areas as you extend further north, draped across that frontal boundary into the southeast and much of the East Coast here into the Northeast. And then of course you get those monsoonal flow with the heat of the afternoon thunderstorm development for even to the desert Southwest where they desperately need it as well. But it really didn't change much on Thursday either, because again, you have that stalled frontal boundary, and whenever you see these blues and the reds, that means it's kind of stationary and it stalls right along the Gulf Coast here, right along the I-10 corridor. So it puts all this area into the deep south, much of the southeast, and heading up into the East Coast and the Northeast under the gun for showers and thunderstorms with those overrunning type setup. And going into Friday, it changes a little bit in respects to that frontal boundary actually stalls out and tries to, lift back further north as a warm front. So as it does, it'll carry the precipitation back and push it a little bit further north. So those areas further northern tier that miss out on the rain for the next couple of days are going to come back for those areas, maybe even North Texas, for those further north into areas of Arkansas, northern Louisiana. Those areas will come back with some of the heavier rains. But what really transpires heading into Friday, and we're going to be seeing the first signs of this. So I do feel the cool down is going to be locked and loaded over the next couple of days, especially for your work week. But we are going to see the ridge of high pressure start to back off. It's going to start to back off west and actually extend further north. And as it does, it's going to move across the north central U.S. So for those places like into Minnesota, places like into Wisconsin are going to start getting into the heat dome with those well above average temperatures and some moderate excessive heat really starting to build as that ridge of high pressure will be spreading into that area as the troughing inversion starts to weaken a little bit. So as the cool front kind of subsides, it comes back as a warm front. So now you're talking more of a warmer wind instead of a cooler wind. The northwest flows type setup pretty much puts on the brakes, and you get the southwest winds. The southwest winds brings in a warmer wind and a little bit more moisture wind, as well as the rain amounts will increase a little bit further north, heading into North Texas, heading into Arkansas, Tennessee, those areas back into Kentucky. We'll get into the action by then. But overall, for the next 5 days, we're going to remain on the cooler side in a very nice and pleasant conditions with a good 5, 10, if not almost 15 degrees below average for an extended period of time. Already the last couple of days, but it'll extend all the way through your work week as well, as we'll be watching this ridge of high pressure that's been predominantly over a good part of the west will start to spread northbound. And as it does, it's going to weaken the ridge, weaken the trough, and then build the ridge. So the breakdown over the next 5-6 days, here's your overall precipitation. So obviously where that stalled frontal boundary is, that's where you'll see some of the higher rain totals, and some of those could have some isolated flash flooding. So yes, a lot of these areas could easily pick up 2 to 4 inches of rain, but especially if we live further into the coastal regions, not out of the question to pick up some 6, maybe even some 8-inch totals draped across this region between now heading into the weekend. But what happens for your weekend is that dominant ridge of high pressure will be expanding. So it expands further north first. So for those areas across a good part of the north central U.S. and the upper Great Lakes, and eventually the Northeast, will start feeling the effects of that well above average temperature anomalies coming back, and even some excessive heat coming back in a big way. And I do feel as we end the month and as we start the month of August, we'll definitely have the ridge coming back for the south central and central U.S. with that dominating ridge of high pressure. And then much of the U.S. will warm up in a big way, and we can say goodbye for those below average temperature anomalies, as we head into the month of August. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch the next update while I protect you before and after the storm.